Hello and welcome to Spooning with me, Mark Wogan. We are, as ever, here at the Mount Street restaurant in London's Mayfair, and Chef Jamie Shears has been cooking up a storm downstairs. Well, a number of things, including a couple of spoons that my guest will, of course, be trying blindfolded. My guest this week is nothing short of iconic, and it's not a word I use lightly. His career in music has been so influential over the years that there is stuff he's been involved in that you didn't even know he was involved in. Bands he was in that you didn't know he was in, and bands that he was in that you really knew he was in. I would like to welcome none other than Midge Ure, OBE. Was that enough?
I was expecting someone good there.
Oh, no, it's just you. Midge, thank you so much for agreeing to take part. It takes a certain amount of bravery and an appetite to be on Spooning.
Okay, and maybe a bit of stupidity.
Well, there could be that,
yeah.
But I like to hold that end of things up. Now, if we start at the beginning, born in Glasgow, in you've got to pronounce it. You're going to say it better than me.
Cambuslang.
Yep. Cambuslang, which wasn't, would it be fair to say, wasn't a salubrious part of town?
It wasn't great. It was, at the time, I think it was called the biggest village in Scotland, but it was just got sucked up by Greater Glasgow. So it was a little rough and ready, I suppose. Lots of old, very old tenement buildings.
And you lived in one of these with a family of five in a one-bedroom place until you were about 10.
Yeah.
What were your early food memories from that period? What did you eat back then?
I think it was all kind of fairly basic fare, I think it was all, meat and veg seemed to be the key things. My grandfather on my father's side was a butcher, and my father was a van driver. He drove a van for the UCBS, which is a bakery in Scotland. After the war, and I think in order to sustain the family, I mean, he was getting paid a tiny wage, and to sustain us, the grandfather would give him a little food package to bring home. So we always had meat, so mince beef, mince and potatoes, big thing in Scotland, an easy, wholesome meal. So there was always meat, potatoes, and a variety of vegetables. A big thing they did up there, which whether it was just my mother who did it or not, I don't know, was fried cabbage, and it was a fantastic meal: fried cabbage and mashed potatoes, and possibly
fried in butter.
No, it would have been lard back then. Everything was fat, cooking fat. So the chip pan was always there, solid.
There is a kind of history with deep frying things. I personally say what isn't improved by deep frying it, but the Scottish took it to another level, and there was very little that didn't go in the deep fryer.
Well, I think even recently I read the recent Euros when Scotland was playing Switzerland, that the chant that the Scots had to the Swiss was, "We're going to deep fry your Toblerone." And you think that is such a Scottish thing to do, because and you have to try and put yourself in the mindset of who was working in the chip shop and how bored they were when they thought, "I've got a Mars bar here. What can I do with it? I'll cover it in batter and throw it in the fat." It's crazy, but it's something that they do.
Well, I mean, the other one that plays to what I do in my day job is deep fried pizza.
Well, that's just a sponge with tomato on it, isn't it? I mean, can you imagine how much that soaks up the oil?
I mean, you couldn't do the calorie count. It would go off the chart.
It would go off the chart. And you need some form of ringer to put it through to get the oil out.
Through the mangle.
I've made myself feeling ill now.
But, there is lots more to Scottish food than that. And there are lots of Scottish, what you would, as a proud Scotsman, describe as delicacies. And I've got a few of them here for you.
Oh dear.
So,
okay.
Can you spot what that is?
Yeah, it's a well-fired roll.
A well-fired roll. Now, to a Sassenach like myself, that is overcooked.
Oh God, no.
No, I mean it looks, but I mean what is the significance? Because it's actually called a well-fired morning roll. So is that part of a Scottish breakfast?
Yeah, very much so. That's what I would expect to be a roll. But again, in different parts of the country, that'd be called a bap or everywhere. Every region has their own version of what that is. But that to me is a classic Scottish roll that you would have an egg or a Lorne sausage, a square sausage. And yeah, that's a proper roll.
It's interesting you mention the Lorne sausage, because over here I have another range of...
Well, it's Scottish soul food, that is.
So talk us through what we've got here, Midge. That there is the square thing is...
That's a Lorne sausage. Square sausage, square slice, whatever you want to call it. It's a Scottish soul food. It's a delicacy, that. And every cafe would sell you
and
that,
is that just,
rather than a link.
Now, traditionally, would that be just served like you would serve a normal link sausage?
Yeah.
Or would it go in between two slices of that, which is Mother's Pride Scottish plain? I mean, what I was amazed about this particular item was the weight of it. Because when you normally pick, it's a heavy loaf.
There's a brick.
It's a brick of bread.
It's a brick of bread. Exactly. That's probably got a very crunchy crust on it.
Again.
Similar to that.
And so what I'm taking is the Scots just cook things for a bit longer.
We do, but you think it's you're never quite sure when you're going to eat again. So substantial. The great thing about this was not only the content, but the wrapping. It would have been
an element of pride in it.
A huge amount of pride, but it also meant that your granny, who would live on the 5th floor of the tenement when you were running around the back areas as a kid, and she'd shout down, "Are you hungry, son?" And you'd always say yes. Yeah. And this wrapping with a sandwich, a sandwich and a biscuit or whatever would come flying out the 5th floor, and you'd have to try and catch it. So they'd use this as the protective wrapping, and it would make a hell of a dent in the ground if it hits.
Now back to this plate of delicacies that we've got here.
Yeah. Now,
to the untrained eye, that might look like a creme brulee or something, but tell us, what is it?
It's a kind of creme brulee. It's I from what I can see, and it wasn't something that I had an awful lot. The shell would have been what we'd call, it would be a mutton pie shell. Right. But this one looks like a posh mutton pie.
No, that's the
macaroni, because it's got macaroni cheese in it. Instead of the meat, I presume?
Yeah.
Right, so that's a macaroni pie.
That's a macaroni pie. And then the fruit one, what's the correct term for that?
Well, I'm not quite sure. A mistake, possibly. It's, is that a white pudding?
Yeah.
So it's a white pudding.
White fruit pudding.
Yeah, which I didn't have an awful lot of. And of course, this, a traditional black pudding.
Yeah.
But in a chip shop, you would have what looked like a fat sausage black pudding. Deep fried in batter, of course. Mm-hmm. And that would be a black pudding supper. And again, when you were a kid, you kind of ate what was given to you without questioning what it was until you found out what it was.
Well, I mean, the other thing is, back then, nobody had allergies, did they?
They didn't. That's because we were so used to eating dirt and being filthy all the time. Mm. You built up an immune system.
Yeah, it wasn't so much the 5-second rule. It was like, it's been there down there for 5 minutes. I'll still have it.
I'll have it. Yeah, it's fine. I'll just get some of the grit off it.
You started out as a guitarist. That was your first instrument that you got as a kid, wasn't it?
I had a voice. Yeah, I had a voice before I had a guitar.
But was the family musical?
No, my dad, on my dad's side, my grandparents had a piano.
Right.
And we used to drive everyone crazy. Every time we'd go over there on a Sunday afternoon or whatever it was, we'd be playing chopsticks or banging the piano, driving everyone crazy. And my dad would occasionally sit down and try and vamp out some tune, whatever it was. But it was very Les Dawson. It was more wrong notes than right notes. So
But hold on, as a musician, and this is one of those things that people don't understand. And for those who remember Les Dawson, to be able to play like Les Dawson, you actually have to be able to play.
Unless you bypass it and you're just rubbish at the beginning, and you're naturally bad. My dad used to vamp these things out, and that was the only thing that I'd ever seen him do that was remotely musical. Other than that, it was just a radio we had in the flats in Glasgow. So there was nothing there that indicated there was going to be any musical inkling at all, except the fact that I just had this natural voice. I used to be able to sing. I could remember a lot of the tunes coming out the radio at the time.
So you discovered your musical ear quite early on.
Yeah, I knew I could sing in tune, and that was about it, and a fascination for guitars. And I think that came. I saw a Tommy Steele movie. Tommy Steele was the UK's answer to Elvis.
Yep.
You know,
He went on to be something else.
Yeah,
Half a Sixpence.
Still there. You know, all of that stuff, film actor and stuff. And I saw him in a movie in a Saturday morning kids program or something. In the cinema, they used to do these cinema things for kids, TV series, film series, and whatever. And I saw this movie, and he had a guitar, and I thought, God, the girls like him. He's got this guitar, and he's had a white suit and a guitar. I need one of those. I said that would make me popular.
So you moved to London.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that's when you start to become in demand as a musician, because all of a sudden you're in about 3 or 4 groups at the same time, all of which are enormously successful. So obviously as a young man, I remember your successes with Ultravox, but there's also Thin Lizzy and Visage and all these, the influence that you had and that starting point, which all came sort of out of the Blitz club scene. What was that period like? Because it must have felt, you sort of started it as an antidote to punk, really, didn't you?
Well, you have to remember, I moved to London in '77 to join with Glenn Matlock, ex-Sex Pistol. So that was an opportunity that I didn't see coming. I was washed up, I was finished, I'd had my #1 with Slick. You know, the teeny bop thing was well and truly over.
Which you've talked about hating. That period where, you know, all of a sudden, because what age were you at that point?
Early 20s, 21,
so your early
22.
20s, you've had a #1 hit, and it feels weirdly like failure to you.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't mine. I felt so disconnected from it because I didn't produce it or write it, or I wasn't even allowed to play on it. It's #1 record. So when we found out it was #1, I was dead. There was nothing. I felt nothing. There was no joy. There was no excitement about it. You know, and I vowed there and then never to allow myself to be put in that position again. So when I got this lifeline call saying, come to London, I hear you're the guy that should be in my band. I joined the Rich Kids, and it was vibrant and exciting. The peak of the whole punk explosion, the whole punk thing was great. But by 1978, a year later, I bought a synthesizer and brought it into the Rich Kids, thinking they're rock musicians, rock sound, guitars, synthesizers, this thing that's cinematic. You can do all sorts of things. And half the band hated it and half the band loved it. So I ended up putting Visage together with, we were the half the band who liked this thing, Rusty Egan, who ran Billy's, Little Club on a Tuesday night, or whatever it was. Then we moved on and opened the Blitz with Steve Strange.
The thing about the whole new romantics thing and the new wave thing, it felt it had a bit more depth to it than punk.
But the essence of it was exactly the same as punk. Punk was all about, I'm not the greatest guitarist in the world. In fact, I don't know how to play guitar. I'll get one, learn 3 chords, and my mate will play some drums, and we'll make a record. This was the same thing, but with synthesizers. I don't know how it works, but I'll figure it out. And you create something.
But that thing of, you know, you're playing a traditional instrument and all of a sudden somebody brings out this thing. What drew you to that? Was it you heard it somewhere and thought, I need to get one of those? Because then you go on to be one of the leading exponents of this music. I mean, you made it happen.
I was lucky enough, again, as luck plays a massive amount in all of this, all of these changes. I mean, if you think I'm remotely smart enough to sit down and draw out a career path that is so diverse and so bizarre, these things morph. You know, on a piece of paper, I look like a dreadful musical tart, and that's not really the case. But in reality, you know, buying a synthesizer, trying to get the rich kids to do this, not succeeding, creating Visage, and through Visage, which was a studio production idea. I wanted to learn about production, about how you put these elements together in the studio. Through working on Visage, one of the guys we brought in was Billy Currie, keyboard player from Ultravox. That's how I ended up joining Ultravox. So there's a segue.
But right,
there.
correct me if I'm wrong, right in the middle of this, you end up going off with Irish rockers, Thin Lizzy.
I did.
Which then is like, you know, hold on,
did.
which genre are you in here?
Yeah, well, you know, I never. You find that most musicians don't categorize what they do. They do it. They think, okay, I'm playing rock music. But music journalists will say, well, that's, you know, neoclassical rock, or that's blues rock, or that's whatever. And they're the ones that turn the music into library, you know, the different sections and the different compartments. They compartmentalize it all.
Well, it did used to help you find it when you were in the record
It
shop.
did, but they'd also say, well, try and describe what Ultravox are. And they'd say, well, it's somewhere between the moody blues and Roxy music. And you go, really?
No.
Really? No, I don't see that at all. But that's how they would try and describe what you do. So to me, it wasn't a million miles away, you know, doing the Thin Lizzy thing. I had joined Ultravox. I was finishing the first Visage album as a producer. I joined Ultravox. Nobody was interested.
Which the huge hit off that was Fade to Grey.
Fade to Grey, yeah. When I got the phone call from Philip Lynott saying, you know, can you fly out tomorrow and finish the tour? Gary Moore's not in the band anymore. We can't do it as a three-piece. We're opening up for Journey. We're playing these megadomes.
How many times did Gary Moore leave that band?
Oh, God, he was like a yo-yo, wasn't he?
So you're suddenly on doing a US tour with one of the biggest rock acts of the time.
Yeah.
What was that like compared to the sort of, you know, slightly posturing sort of new wave thing? It's a big jump.
It's a different posturing. It was, you know, there were moments when, you know, you had to jump out the way for the explosions, you know, because you knew they were going to go off. So it was a different type of posturing, but it wasn't my band. So it was, I suppose it was the epitome of a busman's holiday. Yeah. Wasn't it? You know, you think about it, you're in someone else's band, they're the ones that come off stage going, that was dreadful, I couldn't hear the monitors, and I'm going, this is amazing, I love this is fantastic, you know, where are we playing next, you know? And it's a naivety and a joy, and you know, I loved Thin Lizzy. I saw them as a three-piece band.
But out of that came a piece of music that anybody of a certain age will absolutely know and not know your part in it, which is the theme tune to Top of the Pops.
Yellow Pearl.
Yeah.
Yeah. After I did this tour with Lizzy, I was going back to the new love of my life, which was Ultravox. I'd found my musical home. And even if Lizzy had offered me the job as permanent guitar replacement, I wouldn't have done it. Ultravox was my thing. But Philip, while he was looking for a new guitar player, a new permanent replacement, he said, look, he was a bit of a magpie. You know, he liked a bit of this and a bit of that. And he saw that this synthesizer thing was going to happen. This was interesting. So he wanted keyboards in Thin Lizzy, which is the worst idea in the world. But he said, would you come on to Japan and play keyboards while we try out the new guitar player? And then jump up at the end and play guitar for the last 4 or 5 songs. I said, yeah, of course, fantastic. So I did that, but during that tour, we used to jam this little thing. I'm on keyboards, he's on bass, and do. And when he got back from the Japanese tour, he was making his first solo record, and he called me up and said, that thing we used to do, can we knock it into shape? Come down to the studio. And I did. I brought down Billy Currie, and I brought down Rusty Egan and whatever, and we kind of blitzed. We blitzed up this tune, this idea, and the BBC heard it and said, well, we'd love to use the instrumental version for Top of the Pops. we didn't ask for it. We didn't design it for that. But that, again, luck intervenes. That's something you have no control over. You know.
So then what happens next is Ultravox and the success with Ultravox, where you influenced essentially a whole generation to sort of walk around in Big Macs looking slightly unhappy.
Big Macs, not
the food. Large raincoats.
Large raincoats, yes, yes. They weren't all Burberry, you know. Yeah, Ultravox was when you look back at it, it was a phenomenon because what we did, and what I did, I suppose, I shook off the shackles of this, you know, or every track you write has to be a commercial success. It's got to be a single. It's got to be radio friendly. And when I joined Ultravox, who were much more an art school band than anything I'd ever experienced before, I didn't feel the desire to keep it to 3 minutes long. Or it has to be this. It has to be the chorus rate. All of that stuff went out the window, and I felt relaxed and comfortable and safe in that environment to experiment. So although Vienna itself was a massive hit, it shouldn't have been. If you looked at all the parameters that singles had at the time, they had to be a certain length, they had to be a certain style, and then you straight into the chorus, so the hook's instant. It's the antithesis of all of that. But it changed everything, you know.
But also, I mean, I think, aside from the fact that it is an extraordinary song, and anyone who knows about that period will say it is one of the most iconic songs. You know, what sums up 80s synth pop? A lot of people would say Vienna, but the video as well was an important part of it, and the imagery that you created, and the sort of accessible moodiness of all of that. What did you know when you were shooting that video, which again is so iconic of that period, that's what you were shooting at the time, or did you?
Yeah, I think we knew it was something special. We'd already set the parameters for the video. We'd shot a video for our first single, second single, I think called Passing Strangers. And we'd already set the parameters of what we wanted. We didn't shoot it in video. We shot it in 16mm film, which nobody did at the time, unless you were making a movie. So we shot it in 16mm film. We cropped the screen top and bottom to make it look a bit like CinemaScope, and it was film noirish. It went from black and white, grainy, high contrast, imagery to colour, long shadows, everything we saw in Sunday afternoon movies. We tried to kind of create in this pop video. So those parameters were set when we got around to making the Vienna video. So all of those elements were there. And when we were shooting it, we were doing it on a shoestring budget, £17,000, which is a lot of money back in the 80s. And we had to borrow the money to make it because the record company they couldn't see the point of making a video. And we had to say, well, if you have a video, you can be on Italian television and German television and French television all in the same day, without flying us everywhere. Put the money into the video and this will happen. It's before MTV and stuff. And when we saw the finished thing, because we found a guy called Russell Mulcahy who went on to be a well-known film director, and it was him cutting his teeth from being an editor to being a director. So he had a great vision and brilliant cameraman. So they did an amazing job and made us seem moody and wonderful and all of that stuff that we weren't. But
that whole period was, so instrumental and sort of, aspirational for me, because around about that, I was just coming into my teens, and it was, your pop icons were much more distant. They said, we weren't as close to you as say people can be to Taylor Swift or even Harry Styles now, or those kind of guys. There was much more of an allure to you all then.
Well, it was distant, wasn't it? You couldn't text someone, you couldn't send them an email. They were less accessible, and therefore a bit in a Hollywood way. It was something greater than the general public, which it wasn't. But the impression was. The thing that happened for us as musicians was that any artistic bent that you had, you could control. Because you'd kind of proved that you could be successful on one level. You know, I went to the record label and said, look, I want to direct the next video. And they went, okay. And they said, it's going to be £20,000. They went, fine. Because it had hit records. So you were allowed to jump platforms so you could control the artwork. You could choose, you get Peter Saville in to design the sleeve, but you know, your instigation. You could design your stage sets, you could direct your own videos, you know, all of that stuff, all of this artistic element that came from the music, you could control. And when we did that, a lot of other artists tried to do the same, because it was at a time when the record label would say, okay, you're going to make a video. And the artist would go, okay. And they'd turn up at the studio, had no idea what the video was going to be, and they'd have to stand in a sea of 6 foot long inflatable bananas or whatever, because that's what the director had come up with, and then do something that had nothing to do with the music whatsoever. And they all started going, hold on a second. Well, Kate Bush, of course, you know, did the same thing. Cloudbusting, she started directing her own videos. You know, it gave them much more artistic control, and record labels allowed that to happen. Because they had the wherewithal to let that work. Yeah.
But you think about now how big you've got to be as an artist to get that kind of control. It's a very different landscape.
Very, very different
But the flip side to it was that the record companies took quite a lot of what you earned. You know,
really?
But there was that thing that, you know, you were this, you know, you could be a #1 artist having done a kind of European tour, and you're still living in the flat you lived in before you had a hit, because none of the money had made its way to you at that point.
Yes, but we're artists, and if the record label had come to you when you're 21 and said, we want to sign you, but it's going to cost you £100,000, you would have given them the money, because it was an opportunity for you to do what your heart's desire was. You know, nobody pays any attention to the contracts at the time. It's not until it all happens, you know, George Michael or Prince or whatever, they stood up to it and said, no, enough. I'm not doing this anymore. We renegotiate now.
Yeah.
You know, when I get a fair slice of the pie.
Yeah.
See, pie, to bring it back to the...
Yeah, no, absolutely. Back to food. But before we go back to food, we have to talk about, and you may well be sick of talking about this, Band-Aid.
All right.
Band-Aid.
Okay.
Band-Aid. And what you, and we'll talk about you in it first, because there was another bloke involved. What you managed to pull together there, given the time period, and like you alluded to, you know, no mobile phones, no text messaging, no email, you pulled together this extraordinary song that then blew up into this extraordinary sort of fundraising beast that it is still to this day. When you got that phone call from Bob Geldof saying, I've had an idea, talk to us at that moment, because it is so iconic that, you know, it just came out of a phone call where I think, weren't you talking to his then girlfriend who became his wife, Paula Yates, on the phone, and he goes, hold on, I want to speak to him. And he grabbed the phone off her.
She handed me the phone, and he had just seen the first footage of the famine in Ethiopia, which I found out much later had been happening for 2 years at this point. So it was biblical. It was ridiculous. It was more than obscene. And he had seen this at home, you know, and he said, I want to do something. I'm incensed by this. It's just unbelievable that this is happening in this day and age. And he said, but the Boomtown Rats aren't big enough to pull this off on their own. Will you help? And of course, you don't say no to Bob. So we met up a couple of days later.
Now, to those who don't know Why do you not say no to Bob?
Well, I think everybody's seen him on television, and he's larger than life, and he's very, very persuasive. You know, so he's very
slightly frightening.
Equal measures. In fact, more frightening, I think. So we met up a couple of days later and discussed what we could possibly do. And the obvious thing is that we're not capable of doing anything other than writing a song, maybe. The plan was, in a very cold, calculated way, if we wrote a Christmas song, and specifically a Christmas song, because the charts freeze over the Christmas New Year period, you can sell twice, maybe 3 times as many records during that period as you could any other time of the year at the number one record. So a Christmas song, we couldn't cover a Christmas classic. We had to write something because 50% of the money generated from a record sale would go to the writers. So we couldn't do White Christmas, it would go to Irving Berlin's estate or whatever. So we wrote something. I went back from this with an idea. Well, okay, right, I've got to come up with something and hold my end of the bargain. And I sat with a little Casio toy keyboard and put it on a bell sound and came up with it. And in fact, someone found a cassette of me recording myself doing this at the very, very bones of it. And it's all over the shop. And then eventually out comes this da 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 da. And I sent it to Bob, and he hated it. And then he came to my place with a guitar. And he plays the guitar upside down. He's left-handed, and he sang what he had. And I said, "That's great. Can you just do it again?" And he did it, and it was completely different. So I ended up recording his bit on a cassette and said, "Right, leave it with me." And I went to my studio and started piecing together this thing and layering up the tracks and playing all the instruments on the thing while he ran up my telephone bill, calling all the artists to bludgeon them into committing to doing it. But at this point, the difference was I hadn't seen the footage when he spoke to me. By the point he accosted the other artists, everyone had seen the footage. This was global news, and it was a fairly easy thing to do. The first thing that happens when you're trying to procure artists for a charity event or any major event is their agent or the manager will say, "Who else is doing it?" And that gauges whether it's right for their artist or not. We spoke directly to the artists, and they all said yes.
But it was also sort of the first of its kind, and therefore you were breaking new ground. But it's just the lists of artists that you managed to get to turn up, I think, in West London on a Sunday morning, probably all hungover.
Yeah, there's no probably about it.
with, I mean, it was literally you, Bob, the studio, a sort of guide track. You'd played everything on it. You had to get Phil Collins to lay his drum tracks down. And then there was that sort of thing where you had all the biggest artists of the time, and people must have been nervous to go first. Who was going to go first?
Petrifying. I mean, absolutely petrifying. I mean, it's you imagine standing in a room full of people who are probably more famous and better than you are, and you're expected to stand up in front of them all and sing a song you've never heard before in your life.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't email it to someone. You couldn't send it to them. They all turned up cold, not knowing what this was, but knowing why they were doing it, and prepared to humiliate themselves in front of everyone else.
But also, no catering, no assistance, no nothing.
There's a microphone and a camera. There we go. You're on.
We're going to point this up your nose,
That's it.
put that in front of your mouth. And get on with it. How good are you?
Yodel in front of your friends. Yes, on a Sunday morning.
Now, for people who don't know, the song then went on to sell nearly 4 million copies that Christmas, making it. It's the biggest selling.
It was for a while, yeah.
Yeah, biggest selling. It was certainly the biggest selling Christmas single.
It was the biggest selling single in UK history for a couple of years.
Yeah, and then Live Aid came out of that, and again, extraordinary group of people brought together on both sides of the Atlantic for that, and your whole life suddenly gets caught up in that.
For a while, I can't say mine was. I mean, I'm still a Band-Aid trustee, the body of people that we put together to oversee the.
But I suppose what I'm getting at is you were much more instrumental in it than perhaps your ego or the press or whatever stated. You know, you made an awful lot of it happen, and that obviously because Bob is bigger and louder and whatever, everybody associates him with it. But you know, it equally wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for you. And I think, you know,
it was a team, you know, and it was a perfect partnership in a way. I mean, we've never partnered in anything else since.
I wonder why.
It was a perfect partnership because he's everything I'm not, and I'm everything musically he's not.
Yeah.
You know, my domain was sitting behind that desk, making that record. That was my comfort zone. That's what I did. I drove all of that side of it. His domain was, you know, accosting the UN, was giving Thatcher a hard time, you know, because he's brilliant at that. He's a highly educated, clever guy, and he's uberly passionate. And one helped the other, and none of it would have happened if that teamwork hadn't been there to do it. So yeah, you know, it is loud and brash. As I've described it, if we're both standing at a bar trying to order a drink, he'd get his drink straight away, and I'd still be there 20 minutes later waving my 20 quid, you know.
But when I was doing the research for this, I looked back to an interview that you did with my dad in about 1986, and I think you just launched Sport Aid, which was the next thing after. And you say in the interview, yes, I think it's now time for Bob and I to step back from all of this, which then over the years has proved impossible to do because you're both so linked with it, and it, you know, it was such a sort of defining moment. I don't say this lightly, defining moment in musical history, defining moment in history in terms of what it was, you know, trying to help and how it changed people's perceptions as to how you can help things, but also, you know, you're still linked with the charity to this day. The song still generates, you and Bob still give all your songwriting proceeds to it. So you were never really going to get away from it, were you?
Well, in our naivety, we thought 6-month project, and then we'll just get on with our lives. You know, 40 years later, that's not the case. We still have the same body of people that we put together to help us oversee this, because, you know, you don't want to trust a couple of musicians with that kind of cash.
No.
And realistically, we didn't know what we were doing with it. So we surrounded ourselves by people who did. We took our first advice from George Harrison.
Yeah.
From George Harrison. He said, get yourself good accountants. Make sure the money is safe and controlled and done properly. So the same body is there, but nobody saw this would last 40 years, you know. No one saw it would need
and still chart every Christmas and still.
Well, it's our task, I suppose, you know, to make that song, and I'm sorry for this, that song happen as often as possible. Do as many variations of it as possible.
Although you would say it's some of your least impressive work.
I'd say as a song, yes, it's not the best thing I ever wrote, but as a record, it still does its job incredibly well.
Yeah.
Still, you're walking around the supermarket and on a cold October morning when they start playing Christmas records, and that comes on, it's still hearing the arms stand up.
Okay, we have come to that time in proceedings when you might have to slip your glasses off.
Okay.
You see,
I put the glasses on so I could see the food. That was all.
I went with fade to grey with
good.
your blindfold, which the lovely people at Smug give us.
Thank you.
So if you slip that on, it is now time for your first spoon.
All right. Is there an octopus in there?
No.
I'm just
wondering
what's wondering.
There's nothing. I'm not feeding it anything with 8 legs. It should just stretch.
Oh, should it? Okay.
Yeah. There we go.
Right, there we go.
I'm not feeding you anything with 8 legs.
Okay.
I will feed it to you. So I'm going to slide in this first cloche here, open this up.
Right.
Now this is the first spoon I'm going to be giving you.
Okay.
So here's the spoon. It's right in front of you. Open wide.
Right.
Bit wider. There we go. Take that in. Tell me, what are the flavours? What are the textures you're getting there? Is it a nice experience? Is it a terrible experience?
It's fishy.
Yep.
Capers.
Mm-hmm. You're doing well so far.
Some kind of fish, I don't know. It's not monkfish or something, I don't know.
Take the blindfold off. So you said you hated seafood. So I thought, being in Scotland, we would deep fry the scallop, and I would hide the capers, which is the other thing you said, in a warm tartar sauce, which is one of the signature dishes here. Now, was that? I mean, your face is telling me that wasn't necessarily a pleasurable experience for you, or did you enjoy what we fed you?
I'm still busting capers in my mouth.
Well, you've got some iron brew to wash it down.
Is that a match? It wasn't an unpleasant experience, and it wasn't an unpleasant taste by any stretch of the imagination. It's just fishy, and I'll tell you why I think I have this aversion to it. When you're a kid and you were cold coming on, your mother used to spoon feed you cod liver oil. Fish has that essence about it, and it maybe takes me all the way back to that moment when this big spoon would be coming towards you, and it was your head couldn't go back any further. You know, you had
Well,
to
strangely, I've got a bottle of cod liver. No, but so you really don't like seafood as a result of that, do you?
I'm currently living in Portugal.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't be, because it's got the best seafood in the world.
I know.
Yes, people travel there to go and have the octopus and stuff, and I just don't eat it. It's not my thing. But being Scottish, fish and chips, perfect.
So you do eat
Yes.
fish? Because I mean, I read you.
If it's in batter,
But
come on. If it's in batter,
but you
I'll have
like
it.
to cook Thai-inspired fish
I do.
dishes.
I do.
Right.
I like that. I don't necessarily eat it. I like the whole process of making it.
Yeah. So have we in any way improved your opinion of capers and or seafood?
No.
Okay, good. I feel epically. Well, it's not just me; it's Jamie. But we wildfire. So in that case, we're going to move on very swiftly, and ask you to put on the blindfold again.
Okay. Oh God. Okay.
And we're going to get your second spoon in.
All
now,
right.
these are all based on the questionnaires
Okay.
that you answer, that all our guests answer before coming on. I'm just going to slide in the second spoon.
Okay.
Here. Okay. Are you ready, sir?
Not really, but I'll
It's
try.
right in front of you here.
Okay,
Open
ready?
wide. There we go. Quite a big mouthful. Just come in. There we go. Now, what have we got there? Describe the textures.
Rice.
Mm-hmm. Which you said you loved.
Mm-hmm.
See, it's difficult when you're blindfolded, isn't
It
it?
is. I recognise the taste, but it's a risotto.
It is a risotto with the blindfold off. So that is a pea and goat's cheese risotto.
Love goat cheese.
Yeah. So we tried to give you something that challenges and something that you love.
No, that's really nice. That's lovely.
Good, good. So we're ending on a high note
Woo.
with food. But before we go, I just want to talk about your tour that you're about to set off on. Tell people what that's about. It's the collection of you're doing all the hits.
I'm trying to. I mean, I wanted to avoid calling it the Hits Tour, and so I came up with the idea catalogue, which covers what I think I represent. Yeah, so from when I started to control it, not the slick era.
So you won't be doing that song?
So from the rich kids right through to now, I'm looking at, and I haven't decided exactly what yet. Into
I mean, you've got till November.
I've got plenty of time.
Yeah.
In amongst all the hits that people expect to hear, because I hate it when you go and see an artist and they refuse to play their big hits, and you think, don't be a dick, just do it. That's why everyone's there.
Yeah.
Why everyone's there. So the hits, but then fan favourites, and ones that I think maybe would have been nice if they had got recognised more. I think most artists have got a brilliant best of all our misses, all the ones that didn't quite make it.
Because obviously you have the sort of pinnacle in terms of sales numbers with a song that you wrote, which is, the Band-Aid song and Do They Know It's Christmas, which you don't view as your best work. What song do you view as your best work then?
It's very difficult to say. So that...
or does it change?
It's like your kids, you love them all. They're all yours, but sometimes they're not you.
Yeah.
And that's just the way, that's life. And it's the same for songs.
I've only got the one kid, so he can fall in and out of favour all the time.
I've got 4 daughters.
Oh, you're outnumbered.
And I'm totally outnumbered. And it's the same for songs. So sometimes you think, I like that, and then you get fed up with it after a while, and you like something else that's been kind of lying just below the surface, and you hear it again, and you go, oh, that was actually quite good. I quite enjoy that. I don't listen to all my stuff. The only time I hear my old catalogue is if I'm going out on tour and I'm looking for something different to play rather than just the hits. So there's a classic example is, sort of 20 years ago, I wrote a song called Breathe, which I thought at the time was one of the best things I'd ever written, and the world didn't agree, and it rapidly became the worst selling record I'd ever made. Until a Swiss watch company in Italy decided that this song was going to be used on an advert. And when people heard it, they didn't know it was me, they didn't know anything about it, they just heard a snippet of it, and it was huge. Nothing changed, same piece of music. But one minute it's completely out there, and 2 years later, all of a sudden I'm a genius. That sometimes happens. Things fall through the floorboards,
But I think that's what, anyone going to this tour, that's the treat they've got in store, is to discover the breadth of your musical influence and what you've done. Because it's like, oh my God, he wrote that. Oh, because there is because you're not a banner waving, check me out, I'm this, there doesn't appear to be an enormous ego. That a lot of what you've done, sort of that it's you've done it, has gone under the radar, whereas these songs are huge. And I think anyone who is lucky enough to get tickets from the 15th of November, starting at the Bournemouth Pavilion, and then going all the way through, you can enjoy it at Christmas with the big show at the end in Glasgow at the Royal Concert Hall. I mean, they're going to get a kind of journey through your musical successes.
I think the thing that if you had an inscription on your headstone, if you ever have one,
mine would say Spike Milligan. I told you I was ill.
I told you. Or John Le Mesurier. It's all been rather wonderful, hasn't it? It's great stuff.
So what would yours say?
I would just say, I did my best.
Yeah.
So, and it's the same everywhere. And I don't walk through a concert. I don't pace myself out. I don't underestimate an audience. An audience can tell if you mean it or not. And I don't do this. This is hard work. I don't do this for the money. I do this because I need to, and not because I need to financially. I need to because I've done this all my life.
Because it's who you are. And I think because it's who you are, what I like and what I've loved doing, preparing for this episode with you, is going back and listening to that back catalogue and sort of really kind of being able to appreciate the importance of your role in that era and the influence of how it's spread out. And I quite like the fact that, when it came to that point where, oh, we're going to sample this, we're going to do this, and you're just going, nah. Don't want you messing that up.
Don't want it, don't need it.
Don't need it. But as I said, the tour starts on the 15th of November. They can go to midgeure.co.uk to get the tickets. Yeah. And I would, if you're not completely familiar with all of Midge's work, I highly recommend you go and see this show. But I want to thank you for taking part. I want to thank you for for the years of musical joy that you've given me and many other people, and it's been a real pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
That is it for this week on Spooning with me, Mark Wogan. And next week, of course, I will be joined by another very special guest who will be taking on the spoons blindfolded. But until then, you can get this podcast wherever you get your podcast from. And of course, we do film it and you can see it on YouTube. But remember, always leave 5 stars. And if you feel so inclined, subscribe. And until next week, stay beautiful.